Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And today I have a fascinating guest with me. Her name is Roni Robbins. She is an award-winning editor, writer, and author of her multiple award-winning debut novel titled Hands of Gold: One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune. Her highly acclaimed award-winning novel is loosely based on the inspiring true story pulled from the original cassette tapes left by her maternal grandfather, Sam, who experienced TB, a workplace shooting, an accidental killing, and walked thousands of miles across several countries to flee anti-Semitism in pre-Nazi Europe. Wow. Roni, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And
Wow, that was a
congratulations
lot
on
of,
the book.
thank you. You mentioned awards a few times, so probably don't need all that.
Well, I think you do because I've read,
Oh,
your bio, and to have earned that many awards, it takes quite a lot of skill, talent, and perseverance. So congratulations.
thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
But I would think that the most, maybe your most favorite or cherished award or awards would be the ones that you received from writing this novel. That's just a guess.
Well, writing the novel, I'm super proud of. Yeah. I mean, I haven't done it as long as I have been a journalist, so
Hmm.
it's a newer passion and
Hmm.
sideline of my writing. So,
Hmm.
yes, I worked really hard on it for a
Hmm.
long time. So, yes, I'm happy to have won awards.
Well, it's a completely different experience too, because it's number one, it's so personal. And,
Very.
you are providing or giving a voice to your grandfather so everybody could understand him and hear his story. So that's a lot of responsibility, I would imagine.
Yes, and I tried to be as historically accurate as I could be
Hmm.
since I don't know what his life was like before I met him, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, so, he was just grandpa. I don't know him as a young man, so I had to channel what a young man might go through and feel like. And,
Hmm.
so that was interesting, channeling a young man as a middle-aged woman at that point when I started this, I was a younger woman, uh, now middle-aged. But I was a young mom and so anyway, it was a different gender and different age, I guess, at that point. Although the story takes you from his birth to his end. So
Hmm.
so you do see the life of a person. So
Hmm.
at some point he was my age.
Hmm. That's really hard to wrap your head around, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, and I told
And
you before we started recording, I'm doing a family history. And, when it comes to writing my mother's story, well, that's a piece of cake because it's really easy for me to get into her head, as a woman but to try and get into my father's head and speak for him when his experiences were in Eastern Europe in the 1930s, was it's really hard. It's really hard for me to kind of put myself in that position, but you really have to try and embrace that.
yes, so my story was based on his life, my grandfather's life. And so I took he left cassette tapes
Hmm.
of his life and his adventures and his near-death experiences because he had survived a
Hmm.
few times different incidents. And so I used all of that. So I had his way of speaking, which I've been told I captured very well, as if you're actually in the room with him, just listening to him tell you his story. But as far as what he would have experienced growing up, I
Hmm.
had to make a lot of that up. based on research, and I spent a lot of time making sure it was historically accurate. And also, I guess I channeled, like I said, men in general, men in my life, what men might think at different points. So I did my best there. And I've been told by those who knew him that I did it well. So I don't know exactly how I was successful doing that, but I managed to do it. So I've got men in my life that I was able to use as reference.
Oh, nice. Nice. So when you were growing up or when spent time with your grandfather, were you aware of any of these stories or what he had been through? Did he share that with you or did he sugarcoat it or just, not even say anything?
So my thought is, my memory was that they would shush anything that, they'd start talking in Yiddish if they wanted to talk about something, but we had to probe about the Holocaust, and they really didn't want to talk about that. My grandparents both lost most of their family in the Holocaust in Europe because they came here between the wars. And so they did hear about their family having perished and what's that like. And that's in the novel, that guilt, that feeling of helplessness that one would feel if their family had all perished and they didn't feel like they could have done more. They didn't do enough, or, that there, but for the grace of God, go I. So there was all of that. But they did try to switch to Yiddish and think that we might not, their native language when they wanted to hide something. So no, they didn't, unless you asked them specifically about it. And even then they were sugarcoating it. They didn't want us to be filled with those kind of thoughts in our heads as young people. We had learned it, of course. We learned about the Holocaust in our studies on our own. But the purpose of the cassette tapes that were left, my aunt had given my grandfather cassette tapes and said, I think it's time that you record this story that your grandchildren have been asking about. So maybe some of the children knew better or experienced that secondhand what it was like to hear that information that was coming across about the Holocaust. But anyway, he left some of those thoughts on the cassette tapes that he wouldn't leave to us in conversations. Maybe we were old enough now to hear it all. Most of us were adults.
At the point that that happened, that your aunt gave him the cassette tapes and he started to record his stories, how old was he then? Or what point in his life?
So he was he was at the end of his life. So they actually died a year apart from each other, my grandparents, in the early 90s, and 1 year apart to the day. And so somebody pointed out that they actually were the same age at death because my grandmother was older and she went first. So there was a lot of irony there, but he was at the end of his life. And she was still alive at the time. So it was probably in the late 80s that he was recording this. He was in the nursing home at the time. So this was filling his days, taking his mind off of his wife, who was in and out of the hospital at that time and closer to death. And then he kept recording even after she had passed away. So, yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about your grandmother, her background. So, was she in Eastern Europe or in Europe at the time, before, the Nazis invaded or took over, or, the Holocaust? When did she come to the States and what was her experience?
So I didn't delve into her past as much. She's from Romania. So yes, she's from that area. He was from Czechoslovakia, which changed hands. So Hungary, we never knew if he was from Hungary or Czechoslovakia. And now it's most of that is probably Ukraine. So she was from Romania. She came here to Canada before him. And he came here in 1925. So between the wars. So I hope that's right. And and He was 20 years old. Yes, so that's
Mhm.
correct. And but she had come earlier. Her
Mhm.
family was in Canada. They were introduced by somebody in Canada. They met in Canada, but she actually was already here in America working in the garment district, and also she was in the Yiddish theater. So she had already in the New York Yiddish theater. So
Yeah.
she already was established in New York before him.
Mhm.
And so she was visiting in Canada and he was introduced to her. So they had similar backgrounds. So yes, they were, and neither one of their families, the majority of them would come here. You know, only some of the
Mhm.
family members were here and the rest would have died in the Holocaust. They
Oh.
didn't, if they came here to visit, they might have thought it wasn't Jewish enough. And that's in the story too. They
Mhm.
thought they checked it out. They were happy that the sibling, you know, that their children were in America. Some of their children were in America. And this is my grandmother's family. They came here, they saw it just wasn't Jewish enough for them, so they went back and then they would perish. So they both had to experience that. But I don't get into my grandmother's brain as much as I do my grandfather's for the story,
Mhm.
so that I talk about her history a little bit,
Mhm.
but not her mindset about what was going on. They
Mhm.
dealt with it together, like they dealt with everything together.
Mhm. I've talked to a lot of people recently who have written their memoirs about the Holocaust, their family survival stories. And I mean, they all have that similar thread in it, of trying to educate the next generation without being completely honest and revealing all of the horrific details at the same time.
Exactly, because who wants to have young children with that kind of trauma in their lives, you know, and nightmares? It's
Hmm.
enough that older people have to have that being closer to it. But
Hmm.
they wanted to, in that way, they were conscious of our mental health, and we're thankful for that in that way.
Well, too bad that more people aren't more conscious of it in this day and age, and some of the traumas and everything that we endure and, our ancestors endured. So, okay, when did you decide that you were going to write the book?
So at first I wrote a column for the paper that I was, for the Jewish paper that I was writing for at the time. So I wrote a column about leaving your legacy behind
Mm-hmm.
in this way. Giving memories a voice is what I termed it. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a column. And that was because I was working full time and I really didn't think about it as something bigger than that. I just knew it was worth noting that I
Mm-hmm.
was listening to his tapes and I thought it was important that other people record their family histories. So I put it aside, but I think in the back of my head, I thought about two things. One, that I had a hard time being a full-time journalist and raising my children in the way that I thought that they should be raised. Not that
Mm-hmm.
they all appreciate that now, but but I stayed home. I decided that I would stay home, freelance, and write a book. And
Mm-hmm.
why was for that reason, but also because I thought there was more to this story
Mm-hmm.
than what I could fit into a shorter column. The column was
Mm-hmm.
one thing, but there was so much more that I realized that I could share if I had the time to really write and
Mm-hmm.
concentrate. And at the same time, I would be raising my children in a way
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think I could as a full-time
Mm-hmm.
reporter with not non-traditional. I had non-traditional hours. You know, a
Mm-hmm.
story breaks, you have to run to it. And I was late to pick up my kids from daycare. And it just, you know, I was with that same aunt that said something that gave my grandfather the tapes and has been difficult to deal with on the book, has also said, you know, you're letting somebody else raise your children, and that was accurate, and they weren't getting a good education. So there were two parts of this. To be a mom, better mom, a mom
Mhm.
that's raising my children with a value of education, a strong value of education, while also keeping my hand in my journalism.
Mhm.
So, someday maybe they'll appreciate that.
How old are they now?
They're in their 20s, but yeah, they
Yeah,
don't know what, you don't know what people go through. You don't know.
right,
I didn't know what my grandfather had gone through
right.
either. They're your grandfather. They're just this old person,
Mhm.
that has some significance because he also was the one to teach us about our Judaism and was the patriarch of the family and
Mhm.
seemed important in a lot of different ways. See, I knew early on that there was more to him than
Mhm.
meets the eye. I really was fascinated by him
Mhm.
and I knew something was there. I just
Mhm.
didn't realize it totally until I got the cassette tapes. And
Yep.
then I'm like, oh my gosh, there was so much more to him that I didn't pay attention to.
Yeah, once you
Yeah.
scratch the surface, it's amazing what you find. I want to go back to your children because as you were writing the book, were they interested? Were they curious? Or it was like, oh, mom's just working. And then how did they react when the book came out?
So I don't, you know what, they're on their own. This is young people, they're into their own lives. So my son did read my book and
Hmm.
he enjoyed it. He enjoyed parts of it more than other parts of it, which is typical for a book.
Hmm. Hmm.
But he enjoyed it. My daughter hasn't read it yet. And
Hmm.
they were too young to know what was going on. But I thought I was able to do it all. That's what we
Of
grew
course.
up with,
Yeah.
do it all. But I
Yeah.
knew I couldn't do it all.
Hmm.
Not as a journalist. Maybe you can do it all if you're not a journalist. Maybe that's the story. Or you can do it all if you want perfect everything. You
Hmm.
want to be a perfect mom and you want to be a perfect, I guess there are women who can do it all. I don't know. I didn't think I was doing a good job because they were being raised by ignorant people.
Hmm.
Ugh,
Oh,
I
that's,
hate to
yeah.
say that. That's terrible, but I would get letters about their progress and I wasn't pleased. And as a person of strong who took, as a person and as an educated person who was raised with education, we Jews, you have two things that are going on. You've got your American education and you've got your Jewish education.
Right.
So
Right.
there's a big focus on that. And so it was important to me that I was the educator of them
Hmm.
in a small way until they could go off to school. And then I had more freedom. So
Hmm. Well, good for you for doing that. I mean, that's very admirable.
so as far as do they appreciate it? My son may. I'm waiting for my daughter to come around, but I'm sure that at some point they'll appreciate just as I appreciate more as an adult, my family and what they went through too. I think you just have to grow up in that way to
Yeah, I
accept. And
totally agree because I know when my grandfather would start telling stories about, Czechoslovakia, and we would listen, but it was just like, well, we've heard this before, and blah blah blah, really. But a lot of the stories, thank God, have been written down, so I have something a really good base to work on. But some of the things that he would tell us, it's like, did that really happen? Did he make it up? Blah blah blah. But it's like, oh no, that really was true. Okay, so yeah, but when you're a kid and then a teenager, I mean, there's so much, we're so wrapped up in our own lives. But the fact that they have that much information about their great grandfather to be able to pass on to their children, so their children, they know their great great grandfather, to me, that's an incredible gift.
well, we'll see how that's appreciated at some point. My son is an actor in LA with all the
Oh,
fires and all, yeah.
oh,
But
wow.
um, but maybe someday he'll make a movie out of my book. But we're
Hmm.
hoping. But
Hmm.
we'll see what happens or star in it if that's the plan, if that's our plan.
Well, if that does happen, you know how to get a hold of me, okay? Because I would love to talk to you about that and help to promote the film too on the show. So let's talk a little bit more about his. I'm going to just reiterate, just for the listeners, one more time about how the story includes, okay, tuberculosis.
Mhm.
So Sam had it and recovered from that. He survived. He experienced a workplace shooting and an accidental killing. And the thought of him walking thousands of miles across several countries to flee anti Semitism. Do you have details of that in the book?
Of course, that's the story. Yes.
Mhm.
He was told he was terminal at 26, but lived till 86. He was a clinical trial patient for streptomycin, which was a groundbreaking game changer. I've been told. I'm a healthcare reporter, so I did a story recently about tuberculosis because tuberculosis is still the largest infectious disease killer in the world. It's not COVID. It was in the back, it was bubbling under the surface. It was always there when we were focused on COVID, but tuberculosis kills more people, has killed more people than COVID, and always has. So, well, always did, even when we were experiencing COVID. So tuberculosis is still in the news. And that experimental treatment that he was a clinical trial patient for, he paved the way for his involvement and others paved the way for the medicines that are used today. But I interviewed doctors who said, yes, that was the original. That was the first for tuberculosis. So the workplace shooting spree did happen too. These are real facts. These are facts. I made up dialogue. I changed all the names,
Mm-hmm.
but meant most of the names. But as far as this did happen in 1958. There's a newspaper article in the New York Daily News. Would you believe the irony of it? I ended up freelancing for the New York Daily News. Nothing seems to happen by coincidence, or everything is coincidence sometimes in your life.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a freelance for New York Daily News. But in 1958, there was an article and included my grandfather talking to the gunman. So he had what we say is chutzpah,
Mm-hmm.
gall, bravery, courage. And I don't know exactly where that came from, except
Mm-hmm.
that he had also just survived tuberculosis and being told that he was, going to die, and he wasn't dead. So maybe he took a chance. But in the article, he talked to the gunman. In my story, he saved people from I took it a step further. So that part isn't accurate, but you can see how I went there because he was already talking to the gunman. So it didn't take much to talk him out of shooting people. So there were 200 people there in that. It was a rehabilitation center for tuberculosis. And my grandfather was the supervisor there. So that article I have. And the accidental killing was he was a trolley driver. So
Mm.
I'll leave that open to further speculation. And I think that was it. But he did come back from a coma and was pretty much thought that he wouldn't survive, but he came out of a coma having dealt with tuberculosis at one point. So that's the near-death experiences, not to mention escaping from Europe, because it was still anti-Semitism in Europe,
Yeah.
and also it was dangerous to cross borders.
Right.
So without proper papers, which he didn't
Right.
have.
Right.
So, and also he was running from the Czechoslovakian army to avoid being conscripted. So
Mm.
he had a lot of different adventures that I capture in the novel.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Wow. Oh, that it just boggles my mind. I mean, and I don't want to ask the question that I was going to about the shooting because I don't want to, give away the farm. I'm sure the listeners will just have to get your book and read it so they can find out
Right.
some of those details. But when you talk about the chutzpah, I love that because
Oh,
in my father's language, what he would say is more guts than brains.
okay. Yes. Yes. Because I also describe him as a hustler. We all are very self-centered, and so
Hmm.
I describe him to people sometimes as they don't see it because they see the bigger story of him being
Hmm.
such a hero. But at one point, he was a normal, self-centered, hustler
Yeah.
and a normal, a self-centered man, out for himself, doing
Hmm.
what he had to do, trading things he shouldn't be trading.
Hmm.
And so that's in the novel too. There's a lot of mystery that I try to weave through the novel.
Hmm.
I took everything that I learned from anything I had ever read and threw it in there,
Hmm.
intrigue, romance, irony, and so hopefully it's all a big package deal of
Hmm.
readers turning pages to find out what the next adventure is going to be. What
Hmm.
is this man going to get into next, and how is he going to get out of it?
Hmm.
So,
How long did it take for you to write it?
you don't want to know that too long. So again, I was raising my children and I was also freelancing. I was freelancing for publications such as the New York Daily News, and some of my articles got into Forbes and Huffington Post. So I was
Hmm.
doing three things at once, right?
Wow.
I was writing this novel. I wasn't in any big rush. I was young
Hmm.
and I had children. So
Hmm.
I was trying to concentrate on them. See, I didn't even accomplish what I probably should have done, which is just focus on them. But I thought I could do a bunch of things that I wouldn't be able to do if I was working full time. Be there for them, freelance when they were in school. I think I did. I don't think I started freelancing until they were in school. Nah, I'm not. I don't remember anymore. But
Hmm.
I was freelancing too, but
Hmm.
not consistently,
Hmm.
and trying to get this book written
Hmm.
and then published. So it took me like 7 years to write the book, and then
Hmm.
it took me a few more years to get it to the shape that it should be,
Hmm.
and enter it into contests.
Hmm.
I entered it into the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest, and it took me several entries to win, to be a quarterfinalist in that contest. Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest. Yes.
Hmm.
And then it took me another 10 years to find a publisher.
Hmm.
And I lost my first publisher. So I was also a what's going to happen next, in her life, journey to record. But I lost my first publisher over a legal matter involving that family member who might not have totally been behind me or didn't think I had the
Oh.
right to take the story and use literary license to change things around to be more intriguing. And so I lost my first publisher after working with her for 2 years. And then
Oh.
about 6 months later, I found my second one. So, life is not a straight line. For
Hmm.
some people, maybe it is, but we
Hmm.
all have challenges in our life. And those were the major challenges. So when you said, yes, about winning the awards,
Hmm.
I worked hard for that. I worked really hard and I had to go
Hmm.
through a lot of disappointment. Uh,
Hmm.
it wasn't an easy win for me
Hmm.
to get to the point um, where I could win awards. And I took a lot of pains to make sure it was award worthy.
Well, it does speak well to your patience and perseverance. That's something that we practice a lot in the martial art that I study. So once you went through all of this
Mhm.
and you finally get the book published and you get your first copy and you hold your book in your hands for the first time, what was that like?
It's an amazing feeling. It's very exciting. I captured it. I had my husband take pictures. Of course,
Mhm. Of course.
that's the moment, when you get the box on your doorstep and open it up and see your book. But for me, just having a publisher accept it. I was so used to getting rejections I thought I had like 200 rejections, and I counted them one day, and I'd like to know, because people ask, and I always say 200, but it wasn't 200, it was 50. But I kept a lot of paperwork, so it was two big folders full.
Mm.
And so having gone through all of that, and just to have gotten a yes, and then to be disappointed, it was only 6 months before I found another publisher, but that's a long 6 months of
Yeah.
depression. So
Yeah.
just somebody saying yes is very important in life, just somebody
Hmm.
saying, accepting what you've done, and wanting to take a chance on you. That was more important to me, than the finished product. But yes, it is very exciting. I think the more exciting thing was when I got a yes after working so hard on the book, that they were going to take it to the finish line. So,
Well,
yeah.
that does speak well, like I said, to your perseverance and your
Yeah.
tenacity, because a lot of people might have just thrown up their hands and given up. But I guess you got that DNA and that kind of fighting spirit from Sam. It's just my guess. I'm throwing that out there just for fun. But yeah, so anyway, there's also the fact you call him a self-centered hustler really kind of cracks me up. But the things that he experienced then too, about, like, going through the Great Depression and then the labor union reforms, and seeing the change in America going from the golden age of radio and television, to experience that much in your life, especially with the background that he had. I wonder, was he ever overwhelmed, or did he just take everything kind of like go with the flow with a grain of salt, whatever?
Well, I have to share with you, because I try to shout out my mom, who gave me the cassette tapes and is my biggest supporter, really. She went through COVID, and she
Hmm.
had poison ivy at the same time. And they also are in Asheville, North Carolina, where they had the flooding. And
Oh
then
my God.
she got bit in the face by something, or yeah, I think she got bit in the face. Um, and and she just giggles it off and says, "What are you going to do? What are your alternatives?" So I like to share this, because I wish I was more like that. See, I had poison ivy, and then I had COVID. I didn't have them at the same time. And I was whining the whole way, like, woe is me. And I think that we do. I think and I think it's even worse, for other people. But I mean, I am super blessed, and it just amazes me that what can you do about it but persevere? You have
Hmm.
no choice. What's your next step? Okay, disappointment. What's your next step? We're in this for the long haul. What
Hmm.
is it? How do you survive anything? How did we survive COVID?
Hmm.
Some people didn't, of course.
Hmm.
How do we survive what's going on in the world today?
Yeah.
My son is in LA with the fires. He's not, it's not right near him, but I am concerned about the breathing there. But look at
Hmm.
all these people who lost their homes. We've had a lot go through in our lives too. 9/11. I have family. I'm from New York. My family was all in New York. Um, you know, and we had COVID, and we had October 7th, 2023 in Israel. Things happen in our
Hmm.
lives, and how do we survive? I don't really know, except we have to keep moving forward.
Hmm.
So, mhm.
So your mom was in Nashville. Did she lose her home?
Asheville,
Oh,
Asheville,
Asheville. Yeah,
Asheville, North
that's right,
Carolina.
Asheville.
No, no, no. Like I said, we've weathered the storms. They're up on a mountain, so no. But my family's getting hit by every direction, it seems.
Wow.
But you can't dwell on any of that. How do you survive anything?
Yeah.
How do you survive anything? I'm just giving you examples that actually happen.
Hmm.
But I had Asheville on one side. Now I've got LA. Everyone's got family all over the place that are impacted by everything.
Hmm.
I know you can tell me different, your family was here, your family was there.
Hmm.
And so we have to move forward. in memory of my dad, I'll also say that, who died in the past year, and he's going to be the subject of my second book.
Oh.
He would say, don't dwell on the past, only look at the future. So you got to, keep I don't know that you can giggle through everything. I'm not a giggler, except when I get with friends and maybe it gets too late or something, but I'm not a drinker. So I'd say if you have wine, that might help things a bit. But I don't tend to giggle as much as she did and does, but maybe she got that from her father.
Sam.
So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not his real name, but yes, Sam in the
Well,
novel.
we'll use Sam because that's who he is in the book.
Right. So you have to just have a strong will to push on beyond, I mean, there's a section of the book that talks about walking across countries. How do you survive that? Because he was a farmer, he was used to being out in the land, out, in the elements. He had a change of shoes and socks, and he was resourceful, and he figured out how to live off the land. He was a farmer. He knew. So he knew these things. He knew he was lucky too. Some of it is luck. And he had to turn back. He ran out of money, and then he regrouped and went out again. So with his tail between his legs, as they say, he went home. He knew that at first you don't succeed, try and try again. That had to be hard, right? Just like losing a publisher is hard. And then, what's your next step? What's your next plan of action? So,
I'm really interested in your next book about your dad. Have you started it yet?
I have started it. He passed away almost a year ago now.
I'm sorry.
So thank you. He was a blacksmith, a Jewish blacksmith, which is probably even rarer. He worked with his hands. So hands, you see the hands there again,
Okay,
hands.
now I get
So this
okay.
one is yes, my grandfather worked with his hands too. Obviously he was a farmer and a tailor. But this one will be, the working title is A Mighty Arm. So a blacksmith uses his arm with a hammer. He was he was an artist, a creative person, crafted metalwork, a craftsman. And so I think what they have both in common is documentation that I can use. He was written up in a lot of different publications. And they both made a difference in the world, and you may not know about them, but they both were interesting male characters. Now, of course, I know my dad a lot better. And it's going to be a challenge to write about him. I did start it. I started it and ended it. The middle part is where the hard part is. The beginning has to be stellar and the ending has to be stellar. I feel like I've mastered that part. And then I have to fill in the pieces, but I'm freelancing for 2 publications. So while marketing this book and doing podcasts with people like you, gratefully for that. But it is a goal to keep working on my next novel.
Okay, I have to ask you, since you said your dad was a metal worker.
Correct.
What kind? What did he do?
So he's a blacksmith. So he created things out of metal. So he worked with a anvil and a forge and fire, and heated up the metal and created fireplace tools and grates and other things. They did casting work. So he had a background in engineering, welding. He was a woodworker, and then he decided to be a blacksmith. And actually, he was also involved in the Apollo space launches. He trained astronauts.
Oh my
So
God.
you see a life of a person.
Hmm.
But he created a business that my family now runs. My brother runs it. And my mom works with it. My sister-in-law works with
Oh,
it. My
nice.
nephew's working with it right now. They built a company from a garage on Long Island
Wow.
into a major internationally known and distributed, you know, factory. No,
Hmm.
many of the pieces are made by hand. And
Hmm.
but they have tools and they've expanded. Let's just say
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And I don't know if he envisioned all of that, but he did hope that his son would take over the
Hmm.
business because he named it with his son's name with it. And so now we have to think about the next generation if it's going to survive another
Hmm.
generation. But yes, he fulfilled his goal of
Hmm.
building his own business.
Hmm. I really was curious because my father was a metal worker as well. He was a steel worker. That's kind of what brought everybody to that part of the country, Western Pennsylvania. He was also a mason. He was a bricklayer. And he built two beautiful stone homes. One, before I was born, for after he and my mom got married, and he built it, laid every stone, every brick, blah blah blah, did it all himself, with help from neighbors. They in the community, it's like I'll do your fireplace, I'll build you a stone fireplace if you do my electrical. That's how they did things back then. And after they had moved into that house, about a year or two later, somebody came to the house and knocked on the door and said, "I hear your house is for sale. I want to buy it." And my dad was at work. My mom was there by herself and said, "It's not for sale." And so when my dad got home from work, she told him about it, because he had made her an offer. And when my mom told my dad how much he offered, he said, "Oh, it is for sale now." And she looked at him. He says, "I'll build you another one. I'll build you a bigger one up the street." And that's exactly what he did. So I have, again, a lot of his stuff. I actually had two beautiful knives that he had made. And I had them, but I recently just sent them back to my nephew, who was very, very tight with him because I wanted him to have them. I thought it was really important.
So they made knives too. So I imagine that we have a lot in common, you and I, for
Yes,
sure.
we do.
I
Yes, we
don't
do.
know if our fathers were the same, they were in the same generation, but they stood out. It's not something that you hear every day is somebody. Now he didn't work in a factory. He started his own business, but
Mm-hmm.
he did work with steel.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how it differed, but steel and coal and when
Mm-hmm.
I say metal worker, it's
Yep.
steel. But
Yeah.
he just didn't work in a big factory or anything. He
Yeah.
started his own business.
I'm
So
kind of guessing that your dad was younger than mine. My dad was born in 1927.
right. So 36, I believe my dad was born. So
Okay, well, about
yeah,
yeah, 9 years.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's a very long story. I won't bore you with the details, but basically, my father and my grandmother left Czechoslovakia on, when was it? December 29th, 1939, on the last
Mm.
ship out of Calais
Wow.
before they closed the port.
Wow. Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was right then. That's when it
Hmm.
all started, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Although
So, and
it was bubbling before then.
it was definitely bubbling. He lived on, they lived on a farm. They had a family farm, and I think they were just like 20 miles from, I believe it was from the Ukraine border. And
Mm,
he remembers seeing, he would watch the soldiers, doing drills and practicing and everything, and across like the fields. And
mm,
as he said to my husband one time, he says, "And they weren't the good guys."
mm, mhm,
So yeah, thank
mm.
God they managed, they did get out. And
Same story, your story. So my story is everyone's story. And you'll write your own
absolutely.
book and then we'll compete with each other because no one will know the difference between Hands of Gold and do you have a working title for yours? Didn't you say you're
Actually,
writing about him?
it's actually about my family. My mom's family. My mother was born in the United States, but her family, her parents were from Yugoslavia.
Mhm.
And
Right.
actually, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was married. His first wife passed away, and then he ended up marrying my grandmother. So it was, a blended family. But they have a whole lot of history. I mean, so I'm trying to do both,
Oh,
the whole thing,
oh,
kind of like a
oh,
family
wow.
memoir. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't sleep
That's a
much.
lot. See?
It is a lot, but
Yeah.
I'm just taking my time and just, I'm doing it mostly for them. But the title of the book is going to be Mata's Garden, because my mother's
Interesting.
Serbian name is Mata. She
Mm,
grew up, I mean, she didn't even start speaking English. They always spoke Serbian in the house until she went to
mm,
school. So a
mm-hmm,
lot of her childhood friends and stuff, and family called her Mata all her life. The American,
mm-hmm.
interpretation was Mary Ann. And she would always call, she had 5 daughters, and she used to call us her little flowers. And so I thought
Nice.
it just came to me one night. It's like Mata's garden. She would just love that because my
Yeah.
parents passed away in 2010, just
Oh,
19 days apart.
there you go. Happens.
There you
Love
go.
story. They can't live without each other. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if that was it. They had the same kind of, they both had a rare form of
Oh,
leukemia. It was just,
oh,
you know,
yeah.
but
Yeah. We had leukemia. That's in the book too. My uncle passed
yeah.
away from that. So, um, but my grandparents died a year apart, and they went through a lot because she was the breadwinner in the family at a time when women were not breadwinners because
Wow.
he was in and out of rehabilitation. So 65 years, the book starts with him saying, um, she says to him, tie up loose ends and meet me in heaven. And he responds, and after 60 years of marriage, you do what you're told if you know what's good for you. So they had that, but they went through a lot together.
Hmm.
When I knew them, she was always the one that seemed to be lumbering, with heavy legs,
Hmm.
and circulation problems. But I didn't know about all that happened with him.
Hmm.
I sort of heard that, but it was like, wait, no, he's healthy,
Yeah.
so, but he was the one who had gone through so much, all those years, and she had to raise the family,
Hmm.
5 children by themselves, so by herself,
Yeah.
and she had to turn to welfare, also, at a certain point, so government assistance.
Hmm.
So they went through a life together, and that's part of the romance. And it literally, they met in the winter, and there were sparks, um, as they met, because a sweater or something can give off that static
Uh-huh.
electricity. So I went with that. I was trying to be extra romantic, but they did have a very romantic life together. So
Hmm.
it just because they went through so much together,
Hmm.
sickness and health for
Hmm.
sure.
Hmm. Well, it's a beautiful love story.
Yes,
And life
yes.
is not easy. Life is
Mm,
hard. And,
right.
you just keep on going. A lot of people don't, they would just sit back and complain and expect somebody else to step up and take care of them. But yeah, I really admire that spirit.
Yeah, yeah. So, and dying to the day of each other,
Yeah.
a year apart, is very similar to your story of dying very close together.
Yeah.
People who had COVID, of course, passed it to each other, and then they both passed away, which is difficult. But I use, the year anniversary is very significant, and I use that in my novel too. Um, I'm coming up on a year anniversary for my dad, and I've been
Hmm.
going to services every day,
Hmm.
even on vacation, and if not online, to do mourners prayers. So I
Hmm.
know the significance of that year anniversary, and I
Hmm.
play up on that, in the book.
Hmm.
There is a bit of Jewish culture weaved
Hmm.
throughout the book, but it can be ethnic culture.
Hmm.
There's a lot of, traditions in
Hmm.
family, and traditions
Hmm.
in ethnic families, in immigrant families,
Hmm.
that are passed from one
Hmm.
generation to another. But I thought it was important that my Jewish faith was weaved throughout the novel,
Hmm.
along with the romance, along with the
Hmm.
love story, and also Yiddish is is throughout the novel. That was their native language. So similar to you, they used their native language up until the children went to school, and then they were trying to assimilate and be in a melting pot. So they didn't want the children to use Yiddish in school. So there's a section, there's a little scene where my uncle says, the teacher says, I can't say goople. And they're like, yes, you don't use goople, you use spoon. If she says you use spoon, you use spoon. Don't be bringing up goople into the classroom, you know, so and I might be pronouncing it wrong since but it could be goople. I think it's goople. But anyway, you know, they were trying to prevent the children from using the Yiddish, but if you spoke Yiddish at home, what are you going to do? That's what's going to creep into your classes.
Yeah. Oh, I have a really hilarious story about one of my aunts, because my mom's dad actually was in the United States and left, you know, the family behind. That's what they did. Well, he was newly married and she was pregnant. So didn't even, you know, by the time he was able to bring her back to the United States with him, you know, his daughter was 9 years old. So he never met his daughter until she was 9 years old. Now all of a sudden she's in school and she can't speak a word of English. And of course, there was a little Serbian boy that sat next to her, and he would, I'm using air quotes, you know, help her. And she asked him one day, you know, I need to use the bathroom, you know, how do I do that? You know, and he told her, this is terrible. He told her, he says, you just
Kids.
raise your hand, you know, and he's explaining this in Serbian. You raise your hand and you say, shit.
Oh no.
And so she did. She raised her hand, and the teacher went, you know, yes, and let her go. And so everybody just laughed and howled, and she went home crying. And of course, I
Yeah.
told my
Oh.
grandfather, and he goes to the kid's house, you know, to have a little talk with everybody. That same little boy ended up being the superintendent of schools.
Oh, see, never know.
Yeah.
But little jokester.
Yes, yes. When there was a jokesters, that was very big thing in our family and community. So anyway, Ronnie, where can people connect with you? Get your book. Give us the links. Of course, all of the links are in the show notes, and they're going to be there forever and ever and ever. But I really like for the guests to be able to articulate where they can connect with you, because it makes it a lot more personal.
Sure. RoniRobbins.com is where you can learn more than you ever wanted to know about the book. And it has a link to purchasing too. You have to spell my name right, RONI.ROBBINS. Actually, I'm sorry, no dots, just RONI.ROBBINS.com. And then the book is available on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, any place books are sold, Books A Million, Target, Walmart, most of these are online. There are some libraries around the country that have the book, and also some bookstores. Some of them are in my local area, and so I'm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh,
So
you are?
yeah,
I
where are
didn't know
you?
that.
Oh.
Well, I'm in Denver, Colorado, but my
Oh,
husband is from Georgia, from a small
oh,
little town north of Atlanta called
oh,
Buford.
so, yes. So further north,
Mhm.
where I'm in Marietta, East Cobb.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So closer in, but still a suburb.
Mhm.
And so it's all over. There's different bookstores where the
Mhm.
book is in Atlanta, mostly in Marietta area, I believe. So and so anywhere you buy your books, it'll
Mhm.
be. And also I'm on Facebook as either Ronnie K. Robbins. My maiden name was Kane, Kayne. So it's Ronnie K. Robbins, or Roni Robbins, you know, different versions of that. Or I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I actually have a TikTok, but who knows what's going to happen with that.
Yeah.
That one is Hands of Gold Novel.
Mhm.
And Instagram, Ronnie.Robbins. So mostly Roni Robbins. If you Google me, you should be able to find me as author or journalist. Some of my journalism will come up first, maybe, but I'd love to hear from readers, and hopefully people can enjoy the book and then tell others about it, because my goal is to get more hands of gold in golden hands, and more golden hands.
Aw.
So, and this is I'm wearing a golden hand. It is a Hamsa that my grandmother gave to me. It's a good luck charm, but it's also a hand of gold, or a hand of God, whatever you want to say, because it's very close. But there's a lot of meanings to the title. It was almost Meet Me in Heaven, but there's too many of those. So
Yeah.
I chose to play around with some other words that I liked. So that have a lot of significance in their own, just as words. So as a wordsmith.
So I just have two more questions for you.
Sure.
One is, what do you want people to take from this book to understand, because I know there's a lot of heritage in it, there's a lot of tradition, and there's a lot of the Jewish faith, which I think is really important, because number one, it makes the book even more interesting, but there are a lot of really fascinating traditions and cultural, whatever.
Yeah.
That consist of the faith.
Right. I think that the story basically is a story of survival and perseverance. And you can go through a lot in your life and still have positive values. The strength of a family, the strength of a partner through life. But I think the main message is, don't let obstacles get in your way of achieving your goal. And for my grandfather, that was to get to America and provide a life, a full life for his family, to be able to practice religion in peace, in freedom, to be able to earn a living. He was a farmer. We talked about that, common. He was a farmer, but he didn't want to be a farmer. He didn't want that to be what he did for the rest of his life. He didn't want to be limited and controlled by his older brother. He wanted to make his own life for himself. And so he came here, and things didn't exactly work out the way he planned, but he got to experience a lot of different careers in his life, most of them involving working with his hands, trolley driver, truck driver. So he did what he had to do to survive. And I think the main thing was he had the freedom that he was searching for, to be able to practice his religion in peace, which we should all hope to have, which we don't yet totally in all places. Freedoms that we take for granted. But that's the main message, is you can go through a lot in your life and still come out, having a fulfilled, beautiful family and life, and feel enriched at the end of your life, that you lived a full life of meaning.
Excellent. One last question.
Yeah.
What do you think Sam would say about your book?
Well, he seemed to want it to be written. He indicated in the cassette tapes that if somebody wanted to do something with this, so be it. He didn't really understand what would be done with the cassette tapes afterwards. He was like, if somebody wanted to do something with this, so be it, is basically the message he was saying. And I took that as a personal calling, because I was the only published writer in the family at the time. Now things have changed now, and other people have that wasn't their career, but they've written books, or they are writers. They might have been writers all the way along, but I was getting paid to be a writer as a journalist in my career at that time. Well-established career and path for me. So I took it as a personal calling. Either way, I'm the only one to do anything with it. So, and if that fulfills his dream, I think he'd also be happy about the fact that it's brought family together. I think that was very important for them, is to bring family together. And I have had cousins that have come out of the woodwork saying they read this book. I didn't know them. Now I'm in touch with them, in constant contact with them,
Nice.
and they're supportive of me. So there's those benefits. What he might not have liked, which is probably what one family member doesn't like, is that I took liberties with the information. So I might not have presented it in the way that he wanted it presented. If I stuck to the tapes, it would have been a straight history, but it might not have been as interesting in my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, I struggle with that. That's one of the things that's holding me back. I have to have a long sit down with four sisters and three girl cousins because we grew up as one big family. And my cousins and my sisters and I were all interspersed. So it was like my mom and my aunt, her sister in law, were playing this really weird game of baby poker. Like, my mom had my oldest sister, and then a year later, my aunt had, my oldest cousin. And then a year later, my mom had
Right.
my sister Judy. And then, then a month later, my aunt had my cousin Lynn. I mean, so it's kind of like that. So it's like there's a lot of moving parts here. And so, yeah, I have to figure that out.
And I would just say, as with any goal, you can talk yourself out of doing what it is you're supposed to do. So I had a lot of imposter syndrome with this book,
Mm-hmm.
whether I was good enough. Yes, I wrote and I was published by newspapers. Those are small, different stories. Those are small potatoes compared to a novel. Did I have what it would take? So I think I delayed and kept second guessing myself. And in
Yeah.
that way, I kept going back and tinkering. So
Yeah.
there you
Well, that's
go.
great advice. Thank you.
Don't talk yourself out of it by thinking you're not good enough. And also, I didn't ask permission per se, so that might have gotten me in trouble, or at least the fear of being in trouble, and that's what prevented me from following through with my first publisher. But I think everything works out for a reason. So,
Mm-hmm.
but just try to keep pushing towards the finish line and don't let other people talk you out of it, or your own mind talk you out of it, I
Mm-hmm.
guess.
Yeah, well, there is that that little nagging, in the back. But I think it can turn out. I think it'll turn out. I have a lot of information, and maybe I'll just change a few names. I don't know. We'll just see what happens.
I
Thank you,
wish you
Roni.
luck.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for being on the show. I've loved talking to you, loved hearing Sam's story and the rest of your family story. It's just very uplifting and it's just so encouraging. I think people need to hear, what the previous generations have gone through, how difficult their lives were, and how they came out successful. And it gives me a bit of hope to know that you can recover from anything. You can deal with anything. You just have to have the right mindset.
Exactly. Absolutely. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you for this. And it has been very fun.
Oh,
Just
good.
a
I love to hear that.
chat between girlfriends.
Exactly. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And remember, we can get through anything and come out of it happy, healthy, successful. And one of the things that I loved, many things that Ronnie said, but one thing that really resonated with me was when she said, giving memories a voice. So remember, let's share our stories with the next generation. Let's share our stories with each other because I think by sharing our stories, we can make the world a better place. And heaven knows we really need that. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.